This has been a moment when this country is grappling with issues of sexual misconduct and the abusive treatment of women and girls. In that context, a criminal case is moving back into the national spotlight more than a decade after the key events took place.
So he was reaching for something?
Yeah, I thought he was reaching for a gun. So I'm like, oh, I'm saying that's what he's done. He was gonna murder me or rape me or something.
And then what did you do?
I shot him.
That was Cyntoia Brown from a 2011 PBS documentary by filmmaker Daniel Berman. You might have heard her name because a number of A-list celebrities, Rihanna, Kim Kardashian West, LeBron James, have taken an interest in her case, in West's case even hiring lawyers to take a new look at it. She's 29 years old now, serving a life sentence for the murder of a Nashville man in 2004. Cyntoia Brown says that she was forced into prostitution when she was 16 and repeatedly raped and abused by her pimp. That year, a 43-year-old man picked her up in a parking lot and took her to his home for sex. She thought he was going to kill her for resisting him, so she shot him. When she was tried as an adult, the jury rejected her claim of self-defense. Now, though, advocates say her case should be reopened so she can be seen as the victim of sex trafficking that she was. Along with broader issues about the justice system, advocates are also highlighting this case as an example of what they call the sexual abuse to prison pipeline. To hear more about that, we called Yasmin Vafa. She co-authored a study on that very issue. She's co-founder and executive director of the human rights organization Rights for Girls. She was kind enough to join us in our studios in Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
As we mentioned, the story isn't new, but it seems to be getting quite a lot of attention now, and I was just wondering why you think that is.
Well, I think, as you pointed out, having the celebrity attention to this issue has been really important. I think grassroots organizers and activists have been working for a long time to shed light around issues not only of Cyntoia Brown, but young women like Alexis Martin, Letitia Clay's case a couple of years ago, Brescia Meadows, and others around the country. But I think that what is interesting about Cyntoia's case is that she was arrested back in 2004, which was a year before our federal anti-trafficking laws even contemplated the fact that Americans could even be victims of sex trafficking. And so now, of course, we know all these years later that not only are American citizens able to be victims of sex trafficking, but in fact, the vast majority of sex trafficking victims here in the United States are U.S. born and U.S. citizens. Many of them, like Cyntoia, are girls of color. Many of them have suffered multiple instances of childhood sexual abuse, have had some interaction with the foster care system. And so her story really shows the narrative of so many young women and girls that we know.
To that point, you were one of the authors of a 2015 report titled The Sexual Abuse to Prison Pipeline. Could you talk a little bit more about what the study found?
Sure. So what we actually found in the report was that in a number of states that had available data looking at girls in the system, the overwhelming majority of girls behind bars had suffered instances of sexual and physical violence. In some states, like South Carolina, it was 81% of girls. In places like Oregon, it was upwards of 93%. So when we looked at those high rates of trauma together with the most common offenses that girls were being arrested for, it really made clear that it was that victimization that was driving the abuse. So sometimes that looks like a young girl who's running away from an abusive home or foster care situation who is then arrested for the offense of running away. And sometimes that looks like a girl who is engaging in substance abuse to cope with the years of trauma. And in the most extreme cases, it looks like what happened to Brescia Meadows, what happened to Cyntoia Brown, in the case that they were actually forced to take more extreme measures to protect themselves as a result of society essentially failing them. And I think that it's not a coincidence that the whole issue with Cyntoia Brown has kind of made a resurgence during the wake of these Me Too disclosures, because I think it shows what Me Too looks like for some of our most vulnerable girls.
I hope you don't take offense to the question, but I did want to point out that there are those who might argue that Cyntoia Brown has actually improved while she's been incarcerated. According to the documentary, she's received her associate's degree. She's working on her master's degree. She's been a mentor to other young women in prison. And some might argue that's the first time in her life she's actually been physically safe. And I just wanted to ask what you would say to that.
What I would say is if you think that detention and incarceration is safe, particularly for young women and girls, and particularly for survivors of sexual violence and trauma, then you're very mistaken. We know that the prison system has a number of very harmful and degrading conditions of confinement that are traumatic for any individual in the system. But when we look at girls' unique pathways, realizing that so many of them have suffered multiple years of very graphic, sexual and physical violence, that
being strip searched, being patted down, that it kind of just reinforces.
Absolutely.
So before we let you go, as we mentioned, a number of high-profile celebrities have taken an interest in this case. Kim Kardashian West has even hired attorneys to take a new look at this case. Is there the possibility of reopening this matter?
I think that some of the advocates and attorneys from Cyntoia Brown's case that we've had the opportunity to connect with are exploring those avenues. I think they are trying to argue that if this case was looked at today, there would be a very different outcome. And so I know there's efforts to reach out to the governor in Tennessee. And I think as a result of a 2012 Supreme Court case a number of years ago that showed that life sentences without parole for juveniles were fundamentally unjust, they were unconstitutional under the Eighth Amendment, there is a growing effort among the states to show that sentences like Cyntoia that do allow for parole, but not until she's almost 70 years old, are equally unjust.
That's Yasmin Vafa. She's co-founder and executive director of Rights for Girls. That's a human rights organization. Yasmin Vafa, thanks so much for speaking with us.
Thank you for having me.
Cyntoia Brown. The Me Too bandwagon has stirred up this case once again. I do believe there's a 2011 documentary talking about this particular case. Now, while I don't think that you should throw a 16-year-old away for life, I think that she probably should have got 20 years and at least give her the opportunity to get out when she's in her mid-30s, maybe. But a lot of what they're saying in the liberal media, especially the feminist media, just like when any woman tells a tale or tells a story, it's always one-sided. Now, true, when she was on trial, they didn't get into fetal alcohol syndrome or whether she had low IQ, even though she got her associate's degree. And there's stories that coming from a Oklahoma prosecutor that is actually teaching a class in prison where she's at, says that she's one of the brightest students. So I don't know where the low IQ comes from. In fact, they were saying when she was in the child system, because she was not the angel that they painted her to be, they said she was actually fairly bright. In fact, they would say she was exceptionally bright. So in saying that she had fetal alcohol syndrome and she had low IQ was a bald-faced lie. Now, saying that she was trafficked as a prostitute, as a young prostitute, trafficked is a strong word. Did she have a pimp? Yes. Did she choose that pimp? Yes. Did that pimp force her to be out on the street? No. Did that pimp force her to take drugs? No. She had been in therapy for substance abuse since she had been like 11 or 12 years old, fairly young, because she drank and did drugs, and she was undergoing therapy when she was in her group homes, and if she was in the juvenile detention system for drugs and alcohol. So to say that she was forced to take drugs, that is a very, very long reach. That she was forced to be a prostitute, that is a very, very long reach. In fact, I do believe this wasn't the first guy that she had run away with as a minor. In fact, she had a very loving adoptive mother that had constantly begged her to come home. Now, was there molestation in her adoptive home? That's hard to say. That's never been proven. Was she troubled because her white birth mother didn't want her? Now, that is very true. To say that she wasn't a troubled young girl at the time would be a lie. She was very troubled. That's possibly why she was constantly in criminal trouble basically her whole life. She was a very violent little girl. She had a long record of altercations in school. That's one of the reasons why she was in school, in juvenile detention camp, because she beat up on, do you believe she beat up on a teacher? She beat up on students. She had a history of being violent. So whether that came from her troubled home life or the fetal alcohol syndrome, that's hard to say. She was troubled. Was she touched by somebody in her adoptive home? There's evidence that points to that happening. The fact that she was constantly running away. She ran away from her adoptive mother. I think she had a relative that she lived with that she couldn't get along with because she was doing drugs and drinking that actually had to put her out. She was away from home. She was actually actively selling drugs. So she wasn't the baby-faced angel that people make her out to be. She was a troubled teenage girl at the time. The guy, Cutthroat, her pimp, who was a very violent man, there's no doubt about that. He was accused of robbery. He was accused of maybe even murdering somebody. I don't know whether he was actually jailed for it, but he was actually accused of it. He wasn't the nicest person, but he dealt drugs, he dealt coke, and to get her fix, she had to go out and prostitute herself, which is not unlike millions of stories that we hear all over the country. To say that he trafficked her, that's a reach. Under the feminist laws, you might say that she was trafficked. But not to get too far ahead of the story, but just to say when she was caught and the police arrested her, she actually protected him, her pimp, and she took full blame for what she did. Does that sound like somebody forced into sex slavery? It doesn't to me. The fact that he gave her a gun to protect herself doesn't sound like she was forced to do anything. If he was her captor, why would her captor give her a gun? But that's just one of the many details that point to her being where she is. Like I say, I don't agree with throwing her away for 50 years as a 16-year-old. I don't agree with that, but I don't think 13 years for what she did is too long of a sentence. I think what she did was heinous, in my opinion. But let's get into details. Okay, she was in Tennessee. I do believe it was Chattanooga, or I think it was Chattanooga, Tennessee. And she was living out of a hotel with her pimp, Cutthroat. Cutthroat was selling drugs, cocaine, out of his apartment. He was doing that, and she was out there hustling tricks. So her John actually picked her up outside of Sonic Burger from the whole strip that she was walking. And he picked her up. He actually took her to the Sonic Burger, bought her food. He took her home where she ate her food. They watched TV, and then they went to bed. Now, she says she was raped, but I don't know anybody that picks up a prostitute and rapes her. I don't know anybody would rape a prostitute in his own home. But somewhere along the line, they had sex. Her version is that he was constantly getting up and down throughout the night. It's his house. I guess he can get up and down and do whatever he does, whatever his habit is throughout the night. It's his house. But she said to that he was acting suspiciously. She said earlier he had shown her his collection of guns. Evidently, he bragged to her that he was in the Army and he was a expert marksman. Now, whether that's true or not, we don't know, but let's take it for what it is. We'll take it that that's true. Now, somewhere during the night, whether they had sex or not, he rolled over to the side and he had his hands under his head. Now, she says she got scared and she thought that he was reaching for a gun, so she put a pistol within the foot of his back of his head and blew his brains out. Now, when they did the autopsy, when they came in and looked at the crime scene, they said there were powder burns within 12 inches of the back of his head. Now, you do the math and you imagine, does that look like somebody reaching for a gun? Maybe, maybe not, with his hands under his head. Now, the police said it looked like he was sleeping. kind of hard to tell with the back of his head blown out. Okay. After she blew his brains out with the gun, she actually took her time to actually steal his pants with his wallet in it. She went to the place where he stored his guns, stored three or four guns out of his gun rack in his house. She got the keys to his truck. She stole his truck and she rolled away. Now, upon interviews, she has admitted that she couldn't go back to Cutthroat without having some kind of money, without some kind of lick, because she had been gone all night. So I don't know what she was paid, but evidently it wasn't enough to satisfy her pimp. So that's how come she stole the gun, she stole the wallet, she stole the truck because she needed to get home. Now she took the truck home with the wallet and the guns to the hotel. And then she drove the truck to the Walmart and parked it. And then she hitchhiked the ride back to the hotel. Now, here's where the story gets kind of murky. She said she was sitting around the next day to see if police had found his body because she was feeling guilty. Now, I don't know how you can feel guilty after blowing out the back of somebody's head, but she said she wanted him to be found. So she convinced a compatriot of hers, another guy that she knew that she did drugs with, to actually follow her back to the guy's house. So she took the truck and she followed the guy. She took the truck back to the guy's house with her partner following her. She found out that the house was still the same and the guy hadn't been found. So she actually called from the guy's cell phone and called in that there had been a murder in his house. And then she left. She took the truck back to the Walmart, parked it back, and had the guy that followed her drop her back off. The police came and they scoured the area. They found the truck, and eventually somebody turned her in. They had 6 armed officers go to the hotel where her and Cutthroat were at. They knocked on the door. He opened it. They snatched Cutthroat out of the house and had him back on the ground with his handcuffed. They're getting ready to do some damage to him. And she comes running out in her bra and panties and told them not to hurt Cutthroat because she's the one that did it and she would tell them everything, which she did. Now, during trial, they tried to paint an innocent face on her, that she was raped, that she was trafficked by her pimp. Her pimp forced her into prostitution, that her John attacked her, that she shot the John in self-defense. But none of the evidence proved that. And it took 6 hours for the jury to come back and charge her with capital murder. Now, I feel sorry for her life. I feel sorry for what she went through. I feel sorry for her bad behavior. I feel sorry for whatever happened to her. Shit happens to everybody, especially black children. But I don't feel sorry for her being in jail for committing a heinous murder. I'm not that fond of white guys, but shooting an innocent, I wouldn't say innocent, an unarmed man in the back of the head after engaging in prostitution with that man in his own house, in his own bed. I don't think you can justify that, even at 16. At 16, I believe you know better. She's not 6, she's 16. 16 years old, you're eligible to be married. You know better. You're eligible to have children. To say that your brain isn't fully developed, it's developed enough not to know to put a gun to the back of somebody else and pull a trigger. Do I think she should get 50 years? No. I think she should get at least 25 for what she did. I don't think she should be painted as the innocent bystander or innocent victim, because she's not a victim. She's an active participant. She always has been. Do I think her story is tragic? Yes, I do. But it's no more tragic than any other black kid, male or female, in a black community. And I don't think an exception should be made for her. If this was a man, if this was a young boy, 16-year-old boy that did the same thing to somebody else, and they got the same thing, I don't think we would be boo-hooing about it or trying to paint that young boy as an innocent victim. There's some places where I draw the line. She was selling drugs, I understand. If she injured somebody, I would understand. I think I draw the line at murder, especially that type of murder. There's no way you could actually say that is manslaughter when you're during a robbery. If she felt uncomfortable that somebody was going to injure her, she had the gun. She had her own gun. At any time, she could have pulled the gun and walked away. Every action that she took demonstrated to me that she knew what she was doing. And she may have done it before. You know, I talked to a officer that's one of my subs on my hangout, and he says that there's no way you could actually do that to a human being without having done it before. And I do believe that she probably has done it before, just not have gotten caught. But that's what I think about the tragic case of Cyntoia Brown. Every person with a baby face is not a baby. Every person with a baby face is not a innocent bystander. And even baby faces can commit heinous crimes. And I think this is just the case. Just my thought, just my opinion. Do I feel sorry for the girl? Yes, I do. Do I feel sorry that she's where she's at? No, I don't. But with that, this is BGS out, and I'll see you guys on the next one.